Greetings. This is the one you've known as Jesus the Christ. There's no doubt that people can know some things by non-ordinary means, by psychic means. Science may not be able to explain how this is possible, but the evidence is incontrovertible. It's reasonable to have doubts about this phenomenon, however, since so much of what comes through channels and psychics is inaccurate. Still, something very real is going on here, and has been throughout human history. Receiving information psychically is another way of knowing. Something can be true because it's an established fact, and something can be true because you've been given this knowledge psychically from a trustworthy source. I say given this knowledge because non-physical beings are behind all the knowledge received psychically and intuitively that can't be known otherwise. Is this surprising? To some extent, you are all channels, in the broadest sense of the word. You may not be psychic, but everyone is intuitive to one extent or another. Every day and nearly every moment of your life, non-physical beings are sending information and guidance to you in the form of intuitions. Whether you receive them is another story. Most people's minds are too busy to notice these subtle communications, which don't arrive in your mind but in your body as knowings and ahas. These subtle communications are easy to miss if you're lost in thought. Your intuitive ability develops over many lifetimes. As you evolve spiritually, you naturally become more intuitive, since this evolution coincides with your ability to detach from the voice in your head. The more present you are in the moment without thoughts, the more easily you're guided intuitively. That is not to say that psychic gifts are necessarily a measure of one's spiritual development. There is no direct correlation between psychic gifts and one's spiritual evolution. But psychic gifts, if they're meant to develop at all, do increase with soul age. However, they can also be actively cultivated at any point in your evolution, which can be a problem. Many spiritual traditions warn seekers of the dangers of cultivating psychic abilities without adequate spiritual development, and rightly so. For psychic abilities to be used wisely and safely, their development needs to go hand in hand with spiritual development. The fact that this doesn't always happen is why psychics are so often frowned upon or dismissed. Psychic abilities are a great gift, but in an undeveloped soul or in someone with corrupt motives, they can be a curse, leading to some harsh lessons for all involved. When channels and psychics are undeveloped spiritually, meaning their connection with God and goodness is weak and their attachment to the ego is still strong, the non-physical beings they connect with in other realms, the lower astral plane specifically, will be of a lower vibration and only so helpful or even harmful. Only when channels and psychics can reach into the higher astral plane and beyond will they connect with beings who are dedicated guides, ascended masters, and other advanced teachers and healers whose sole purpose is to serve humanity. The beings on the lower astral plane range from relatively benign to tricksters, con artists, and extraterrestrials who toy with people through psychics and channels for their own enjoyment or for more nefarious purposes. Many on the lower astral plane are deceased human beings awaiting reincarnation, while others are minor guides, fourth-dimensional extraterrestrials, or what I will call negative entities. When you're psychic, your spiritual development and purity of heart determine who you connect with in the non-physical realm. If you're highly developed spiritually and pure of heart, you'll be able to reach beyond the lower astral, and if you're not, you won't be able to. At best, you'll only be able to reach deceased human beings and lesser guides. The more spiritually developed someone is, the more his or her psychic abilities will be of benefit to others. The less spiritually developed someone is, the more those abilities will cater to his or her own ego and other people's, and more likely the information will be inaccurate, not that helpful or detrimental. Beware of any lack of humility or greed in a channel or psychic. These are signs of not being sufficiently developed spiritually. If channels or psychics think their abilities make them special, they probably shouldn't be using them. Purity of heart is as important as spiritual development in reaching higher dimensions. What I mean by this is a devotion to and love for God and the absence of corrupt motives. Someone can be spiritually developed and still have corrupt motives. This may sound contradictory, but the ego is able to reconstellate even at later points in one's spiritual development. Someone can be spiritually advanced and corrupted by the ego without realizing this has happened. The ego is very tricky, and it can take hold again, especially if you believe you're beyond ego. The ego is what would tell you this, when no one is ever completely beyond the ego. Daily meditation is essential in keeping your vibration high. Meditating will help you maintain your connection with God and those guiding you. This connection is not something to take for granted, regardless of your level of spiritual development. Guiding forces are always available, but you have to make yourself available to them by opening to them and by committing in each day, in each moment, to be aligned with love and peace. Of course, you will falter and fail at times, but your sincere commitment and intention to be aligned with love and peace is what matters. It's important for channels and psychics to put service to others and commitment to their own spiritual growth above all else. The ones who get entangled with unhelpful beings are usually overly focused on money and success. If you're a channel or psychic and you don't feel a devotion to God and to service to others, it's best not to use your psychic abilities until you're more developed spiritually. Additionally, if you lack the spiritual development and purity I'm speaking of, performing practices like surrounding yourself with white light and grounding yourself for protection from negative forces won't be enough. Those practices often give those working in non-physical realms a false sense of security. They assume they're connecting with higher beings when they may not be. Protection from negative forces is something you gain or earn with spiritual advancement. A psychic is someone whose sixth sense is developed to some extent. Some psychics believe they're more developed than they are, which can be a problem. Evaluating one's own ability is difficult, and this makes it easy to be misled by negative non-physical beings. The sixth sense can be an extension of any of the five senses. The most common forms of psychic ability are clairvoyance or clear seeing, clairaudience or clear hearing, and clairsentience or clear sensing. Clairvoyants receive information visually. They see images or symbols in their mind's eye. They also may see auras, spirits, and other energy with their eyes open. More developed clairvoyants are able to see with their eyes open and closed. When they're highly developed, they're given an interpretation of what they're seeing intuitively or through what feels like a download of information. Clairaudients receive information auditorily. Conscious channeling is the ability to hear words mentally and to dialogue mentally with a non-physical being. In unconscious channeling or mediumship, on the other hand, channels leave their body while a non-physical being uses it to speak to others, in which case they're not generally very aware of what's being spoken through them. When clairaudience is fully developed, the person is able to channel while conscious, and this is also safer and healthier than mediumship. Clairsentients receive information through their body. They feel other people's emotions and sense other people's energy. When they're undeveloped, they have difficulty knowing if an emotion is theirs or someone else's, and they can easily take on other people's negative energies. If they're fully developed, they receive intuitive knowings about what they're sensing, which often feel like downloads in their body. They're what is known as empaths. Most psychics rely on one particular mode of receiving information, but some have more than one mode developed. Some are born with psychic abilities, and some suddenly regain abilities developed in other lifetimes, while others develop psychic abilities through practice. Psychic gifts take many lifetimes to fully develop and entail many different lessons. In general, if you don't have obvious psychic abilities and you want to develop them, don't assume any abilities you develop will be sufficient to be helpful to others. Develop them if you like, but keep them to yourself unless you're sure you have something truly helpful to offer others. It may take several more lifetimes before your psychic abilities are as developed as they can be. Just as your 5 senses allow you to know and explore the physical world, the 6th sense allows you to know and explore non-physical realms. The 6th sense is as real as any of the 5 senses, but in most people it's latent, although everyone is intuitive to a degree. To those who inhabit non-physical realms, their realm is as real to them as your physical world is to you. It's just not real to you. When you cross over to these realms at death, you'll have a life in those realms that's not so different from your life in this world, but without the strife and difficulties you experience here. The existence of non-physical realms is a fact. Just because this fact isn't acknowledged by science doesn't make it less of a fact. Another fact is, your known universe doesn't include all possible facts. This is where metaphysics bumps up against science. Science can only verify what it can measure with the 5 senses and its instruments. This obviously can't include everything that's known in the entire universe, not to mention universes. Your 5 senses and your instruments measure only a fraction of reality, the fraction that human beings experience with their 5 senses. Animals also have 5 senses, but the range of their senses is different from yours, so they are in a sense in a different world than you, even though you share the same physical reality, the same planet. To limit facts to your known universe based on your 5 senses is to have blinders on, to not see the entirety of what exists. It is human-centric, but understandable. Thank you for your openness. Thank you for being here. I am with you always.